Now British forces moved towards Jerusalem. Ahead of the advance, the Turks abandoned the holy city. Jerusalem fell. The news reached Lawrence. He hurried to be part of the celebrations. For the man who modeled his early life on the Crusaders, marching into Jerusalem with a Christian army, freeing it from Ottoman rule, would be a crowning moment. In deference to history, British Commander-in-Chief General Allenby led the Allies into the city on foot. Among the marchers is the small figure of T.E. Lawrence, wearing a borrowed uniform. He was suddenly a British officer again.
I think you can see where Lawrence's loyalties lay, perhaps in the way he decides to dress. Sometimes he's there in all his magnificent Arab garb with the golden headdress and all the rest of it, dressed as an Arab prince. Occasionally we see him in rather scruffy khaki. And then quite often we see him between the two. He's got his khaki on, but he's got a keffiyeh and a headdress and all the rest of it. And there's this sort of, he's between the two. He's standing as the bridge between the Arabs and the British Empire. And I suspect that's where he saw himself, really.
The capture of Jerusalem caused celebration among Christians around the world. It brought the war in the East sharply to world attention. This was the time of some of the worst defeats on the Western Front. Now, at last, the Allies had something to cheer about. But for the Arabs, the victory would have enormous repercussions. A group of Zionists were lobbying the British government to support the establishment of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. With the region now under their control, the British felt able to dispose of it as they saw fit. British Foreign Secretary Lord Balfour wrote a letter to one of the Zionist leaders, Lord Rothschild. In it, he spelt out the British position.
His Majesty's government view with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people.
The declaration flew in the face of the British promise made to Sharif Hussein, the promise that Palestine would be Arab land.
Lord Balfour, the British Foreign Secretary, writes a letter to Lord Rothschild, who at that time happens to be a great financier living in Paris, promising the land that he doesn't own, promising to someone who doesn't belong.
The Arab army knew nothing of this promise. The British continued to reassure the Arabs that they would get their independence. They even designed a flag for the new Arab nation. Everything to keep them fighting the war. Lawrence was also ignorant of this new secret deal. Celebrating the victory with Emir Faisal, he was back in his Arab guise.
I think there must have been satisfaction tinged with foreboding. Lawrence's so-called sideshow had allowed Allenby to get on with the job, and here you had Allied Christian troops coming into Jerusalem, incredibly significant at a symbolic level. But at the same time, you had Lawrence, who knew that things had been said, promises had been made to Faisal and the other Arabs that perhaps now could not be fulfilled.
Among those observing the celebrations was an American journalist called Lowell Thomas. Thomas had been sent by the US government to gather propaganda that might encourage Americans to enter the war. Lawrence was described to Thomas as the uncrowned king of Arabia. It was a brand that Thomas would famously exploit. Lowell Thomas spent 8 days in the desert filming Lawrence and the Arab army. Lawrence could not have guessed what those few days would mean for his future.
Lowell Thomas started the legend of Lawrence. He was the man. He, as you know, he's an American propagandist, and he started the legend.
Lowell Thomas's contribution to the Lawrence legend is absolutely critical. I mean, people today don't realize that Lawrence of Arabia didn't exist in the First World War. Lawrence of Arabia was a creation of a rather slick American journalist called Lowell Thomas.
With Jerusalem captured, the push towards Damascus gathered momentum. The British-led Allied forces headed in from the west. The Arabs hurried up the eastern flank. Lawrence now knew about the Balfour Declaration. He realized that the odds on the Arabs being granted their independence were lengthening all the time. And the closer he led them to Damascus, the closer came the moment when his deception would be exposed. His only hope was to have the Arabs in Damascus ahead of the other allies, armed and secure. Then perhaps Britain might be forced to negotiate a fair peace. As the combined forces of the Allied and Arab armies neared Damascus, the Turks realized they were beaten and fled. Damascus was liberated.
The people met the Arab army with cheers, with flowers. They were very happy.
They were rejoicing, dancing, clapping. They thought that the day of liberation is the day of salvation.
They knew they had won their victory, their freedom. They had won independence. They were elated.
It's a new hope. It's a new future. I mean, it's a future that's based on the hope that the Arabs will become democratized with the civil society, with a constitutional government, with a government ruled by laws, with a government that's close to them, not somewhere distant in Constantinople or in Istanbul, to a king that is an Arab, who speaks Arabic, who comes from the house of the Prophet.
Emir Faisal was driven into the city as a conqueror.
Faisal had become the new national hero, and people believed that this person was their liberator.
There would be arguments about which troops entered the city first, British, Australian or Arab. But it was the Arab flag given to them by the British government which flew over the city hall. The race to Damascus had been won. Lawrence had succeeded, but he was acutely aware of the uncertainties that lay ahead for the Arabs.